Nalak Karij Winji Alak Nini, Nalak Karij Hija Bujabal, Wajak Nunga Buja Lalak Nini, Kura Kura Nijie Borawan. On behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to their elders both past and present. I'd also like to remind people that our meetings are recorded and uploaded to the town's website. Item 2 on the agenda is announcements. I have no announcements tonight. We come to attendances, apologies and applications for leave of absence. I don't believe we have any apologies tonight. No? Councillor Carter?
I request a leave of absence.
And from what dates?
The 23rd of November.
Okay. And I also request a leave of absence from the 17th of November to the 22nd of November.
Sorry, what's that, sorry?
From the 17th of November to the 22nd.
Thank you.
Your end date, Councillor Carter, for your...
Oh, just the one night.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
May I have a mover? Councillor Glennon. Seconder? Councillor Wilding. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Declarations of interest. Councillor Carter.
I previously put in a declaration of impartiality interest in the item, and forgive me, it's the MHI.
12.2.
12.2, is it? Yeah. For that, the history section. It has been, I'm sorry, can I just ask a question, forgive me. Do I have to put in an interest form each time we are at a meeting, including the briefing note, even though the briefing
You can
times?
either state it in the meeting or you can submit a form prior to the meeting. Thank you.
I also have a declaration of interest for item 8.1, which is a petition, the right of way number 5. And I will at that point ask the Deputy Mayor to preside over that item. And on the advice of the CEO, I have an interest in 12.4, which is called a speculative interest. It's an interest which the department indicates I do not have to leave the room, but on advice from our CEO, I will leave the room and allow the Deputy Mayor to preside over that item. And that's all the declarations of interest. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on. We'll move on to presentations or deputations. I don't believe we have any tonight. Okay. And item 8 is statements by members of the public on any agenda item. The public's statement session will be restricted to 15 minutes unless by council resolution decides otherwise on matters contained in the agenda. Each person is restricted to one statement of up to 2 minutes unless by the council by decision determines that they may speak for no more than a further 2 minutes. Again, it should be noted, the public should note that the comments are recorded and live streamed via YouTube, and that there are no protections from legal action being taken against you should it arise from your comments delivered in this meeting. So I'd invite members of the public who may wish to make a statement on any agenda item to come to the microphone, state their name and address. No? So we'll move on to public question time, and questions from members of the public are restricted to 15 minutes is allocated unless the council by resolution decides otherwise on matters contained in the agenda. Each member of the public with a question is entitled to ask up to 2 minutes before other members of the public will be invited to ask their questions. Do we have any questions that have been sent in? No, okay. So I would invite members of the public, Mrs. Brinkworth.
Thank you, Anne Brinkworth, 19 Ida Street, Bassendean. The question I've got is to council on the procedures of giving plaques out. I attended this last week, a briefing session, when the past councillor John Gangel received a plaque. When we got out, I said, let's go down to the dome. And my friend, Mr. Busby, we went down, and unbelievably, I got him to open it. And it did not recognise his mayor position. I rang a councillor today whose late husband was a councillor, I think 5 years, but a mayor for 1 year. And on the plaque, it definitely said, John did 16 years service as a councillor and 8 years of mayor. I think he's inappropriate, disrespectful, and I wondered if that could be altered and changed.
Thank you, Mrs. Brinkworth. I did actually bring that up after having a chat with you the other day. I did bring that up, and the CEO was quite agreeable to amending that plaque. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to get back to you to chat about that. So if I could ask the CEO to contact John Gangel to organise for that to occur, would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine.
So we'll organise that and contact John directly to organise that to be changed.
So unfortunately, I think it has to be another plaque. Because if I remember rightly seeing it that night, the inscription was on the wood, where mine and the others are all on metal, unless a metal can be put over the wooden part. So it's being handled.
So if I leave it with the CEO to contact John directly to work out the details, and we'll see what can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brinkworth. Mr. Busby.
Yes. I'll just... Bill Busby, 53 Hague Street, Ashfield. Just also supporting Anne's thing on that. We're embarrassed for John. John's not going to come to these sorts of things, but for 16 years of service, having given away lots of trophies, purchased a lot of trophies, the cost
Mr.
of that
Busby,
award would
this
be
is actually
minor.
question time. So
I'm asking for John to be not so embarrassed as to have to turn up again. I don't know how you resolve it.
Mr. Busby, I think that the previous, we've answered Anne's question and it will be dealt with. This is actually question time
Understand
for
that?
items on the agenda. So,
the agenda's passed.
no,
This
it's
is
not.
public
So-
question time.
anyway, it will be dealt with, Mr. Busby.
All right.
Thank you.
Also, can I ask a question? If the microphones could be turned up a bit, because trying to listen to the events is rather hard. Sometimes some people speak a bit softly, some may not speak in the microphone. And a suggestion maybe for a screen this way so we can see who the speakers are. We can clearly see you people, which is great, but it would be perhaps a suggestion for a camera this way so we can see who's asking questions.
The microphones are actually designed more for the recording, and I do believe that the staff are actually looking at redoing the microphones in the chamber to actually get better protection of the voices. So I understand that's in the works for the next couple of months. So that will be happening, I think, next year, early next year?
This financial year.
This financial year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busby. Are there any other speakers, questions? No? Okay, so with that we'll move on to item 8.1, which is petitions, and I'll invite the Deputy Mayor to come up and preside over that item.
So, councillors, just to remind you, we had the petition submitted by the head petitioner, Mrs. Carol Sadell. It's in relation to the rights of way, particularly right of way number 5, and the petition was requesting that council amends the draft rights of way strategy to remove all references to a requirement for private property land to be ceded to the town of Bassendean if and when the local government wishes to widen a right of way, to amend the draft strategy for right-of-way number 5 from upgrade to close, and as soon as practical provide petitioners with all relevant information pertaining to the closure of right-of-way number 5. And just to confirm with the staff, I understand that the consultation on this has commenced and property owners have received letters, and the reference to ceding of land has been removed from that already. Is that correct?
Through Deputy Mayor Orr, that's correct, yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Okay, so we've got officer recommendation at item 8.1. Is there a mover for the recommendation that council receives the petition and that it be considered as part of the submissions? That's moved by Councillor McWilliam. Is there a seconder? Councillor Polivka. Is there anyone against? So that is carried unanimously. And we'll invite Councillor Hamilton back in.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And this brings us to confirmation of the minutes, which is item 9. And so the first is 9.1, the ordinary council meeting held on the 28th of September 2021, and that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 28th of September be received. Do I have a mover? Do I have a seconder? It's Councillor McLennan, Councillor Wilding. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The second part of that is the 9.1b, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 28th of September, as amended, be confirmed as a true record. Do I have a mover? Councillor Wilding, seconded Councillor Ames. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 9.2, special council meeting held on the 18th of October 2021, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 18th of October 2021 be received. Do I have a mover? Councillor Ames, a seconder. Councillor McLennan. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 9.2b, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 18th of October 2021 as amended be confirmed as a true record. Do I have a mover? Councillor Polivka. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Ames. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. There is no business deferred from a previous meeting. So we'll move on to item 11, which is external committee reports and updates. The only one being the EMRC Ordinary Council meeting on the 23rd of September 2021. The officer's recommendation that council notes the attached document for the external committee meeting held within the reporting period. Do I have a mover? Councillor Wilding, a seconder. Councillor McWilliam. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We now move on to items on block. Councillors, do I have any items coming out of en bloc?
So I just have a question on the agenda. It still lists item 8.1 and 12.6, so they should be removed from the ones that council is considering separately.
Councillor Carter.
I ask that item 12.3 be removed from the en bloc. Oh, and can I ask that 12.12 be removed as well? No, sorry. Forget that. I've got the wrong one. No, it's all good. Just that one.
So item 12.6 has been withdrawn. And sorry, Councillor McLennan, 8.1.
We've already dealt with 8.1, that's all.
Yes, so, okay, thank you. So the items that we're dealing with en bloc are items 12.8, 12.9, 12.11 and 12.12.
I just had a question about that. Just in terms of the items that have been excluded, the item concerning the revocation of the council policy 4.6, the circus, I was just wondering why that hadn't been included in the en bloc, because that seemed to be fairly non-contentious last time.
I think because it's the revocation of the council policy.
Okay. Yes, that
Okay, that's
satisfies that.
fine. Thank you. Okay, so do I have a mover for the items en bloc? Councillor McGlennan, seconder. Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? All those in favour? I'll declare that carried. So we'll move on to the reports. So the first one we have is 12.2, which is the draft local heritage survey. And I believe Councillor Carter, you declared an interest, but Councillor Carter can stay for this one.
Impartiality.
Yes, impartiality. Okay, so would the officer like to speak to this item, or we spoke about it last week quite extensively? Councillors, do you have any questions regarding this item? Okay, so we'll move to the officer's recommendation. That council endorses the draft local heritage survey as contained as an attachment to this report for the purpose of advertising for public comment for a period of at least 42 days. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor Wilding, a seconder. Councillor McLennan. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We move to item 12.3, which was removed from en bloc, existing carport and patio. So, Councillor Carter, you removed this from en bloc.
Mm-hmm.
You have questions for the officers?
Yes, I would like to, excuse me, I would like to oppose the officer's recommendation on this particular item.
Okay.
So is it going to be debated, or do you want to know my reasons?
Okay. So, do we have any other questions from councillors regarding this item? Okay. So, do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Ames. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Polifica. We obviously have someone against, so we'll go into debate. So, Councillor Ames, would you like to debate on this? Open on this item, or would you?
Madam Mayor, no. At the end of the day, it was the officers' discussion that we had previously to add that particular notation, point number 2. I believe that it's important to ensure that we don't have any further damage to the town's curbside. So I think that there's a pretty reasonable opportunity for us to be able to ask the landowner to ensure that there's some sort of crossover built at their expense. So other than that, I've got nothing else to say. Thanks very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Polifica.
Yes, thank you. I guess I draw everyone's attention firstly to the opposition to this, which was on the basis that if we were to grant this approval, then that would encourage others to flout our local laws, because this could be rectified at a later stage. Now, I have had a discussion with the Director of Planning in relation to this, and there was a common misconception that these were retrospective approvals, but they're not retrospective in the sense that the approval is operative from the time that the structure was built. So they're two separate issues as to whether we now grant approval and what other consequences may flow to the resident that has decided to take it on themselves to construct the structure without first obtaining approval. Whereas what we're looking to do here this evening is to, with the guidance of administration, determine whether or not this structure is now in a form which can be approved. And we have to leave aside the other side of things, which is that the resident had done the wrong thing by not firstly approaching the council. So whilst I am sympathetic to the that person that has submitted that complaint, That's not the task that we have before us today, and so that's why I would seek to have this moved in accordance with the administration's recommendation and with the rider that the administration has included, that the resident be put on notice that there should be compliance with all local laws, including for the preservation of the curbside.
Thank you, Councillor Plifka. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Yes, I haven't spoken to anyone about this. I went out and had a look at it, and it is quite noticeable from the street. I also find that in Councillor Officer's recommendation in point 2 says that it is recommended that the landowners seek to provide a formalised crossover. It actually goes across the council land at the moment, and there's no step-down curb. Why wasn't this made stronger, that it is a requirement, because it's obviously going to be used to house something quite big, that there be a crossover and not just a recommendation?
I believe that Mr Gibson did comment on that last week, but would you like Mr Gibson to provide some information on that?
Well, yes, indeed. I thought it was commented on. I must have missed it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The application before Council tonight is an application for development approval. It's under the Planning Development Act and the associated regulations. The curb and the crossover and the road reserve is regulated under the local law mentioned in part 2 of the recommendation. So it wouldn't have been appropriate, it is not appropriate to conflate the two with a view to making it a requirement of a development approval under one piece of legislation to provide a crossover under a local law under a different piece of legislation. So that is broadly the reason it is a recommendation. All that council could really do in this case is advise the landowner that by not having the crossover, they would be exposing themselves to activity that would damage the curb, in which case there is a punitive response to that under the local law, and it would be in their interest, as it would be for the town, for them to actually construct a crossover, but it wouldn't actually be appropriate for council to make it a condition of the approval.
Well, okay. Thank you very much. I still would like something a bit more concrete on that, but thank you.
Are there any other councillors to debate for the item? Any other councillors to debate against the item? In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those Councillor Ames, you do have a final, but you can waive it if you. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, there's no need to rebut. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against is Councillor Carter. So we move on to item 12.4, which is social housing economic recovery package, which I've declared a speculative interest in, and I'll invite the Deputy Mayor to come up on that item.
Okay, councillors, first of all, are there any questions that you have of the officers? And keep in mind, not only we have the officer recommendation, but we've had an alternative motion for this item circulated by Councillor Plifka earlier today that hopefully you all have a copy of. And Ms Holmes, did you have a copy of the alternative as well? Thank you. So any questions, councillors? Councillor Plifka.
Yes, through you to the Director for Planning. In relation to the 3 sites that are mentioned in the alternate, or I suppose to any site within the town in general, if a site were identified as having a possible contamination, what would be the process in terms of the time and the expense to determine the extent or existence of contamination?
Through the Deputy Mayor, so the process is summarised in the officer comment in response to that, but in general it requires engaging a qualified consultant to undertake the site investigations, which then confirm the extent of the contamination, undertaking the remediation works and the remediation and validation report, and then submitting that to the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, at which stage they can consider reclassifying the sites.
The first step in the process, so...
Councillor Prolifica, can I just remind you to stand when you're
Oh,
asking
sorry.
questions?
The first step in the process, so engaging the consultant to determine whether there is contamination. So say we engage that person tomorrow, how long would that take and at what expense before we would receive a report in relation to the site?
It would take at least several months because they need to undertake field sampling and then have the results analysed in a lab and then summarise the results in a report. And there's also the procurement time frame to actually obtain the required quotes. The current budget includes $66,000 for 2 sites, so it would be approximately $30,000 per site, we'd expect.
And that's in the current budget because it's anticipated that that work would occur this financial year?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ames?
Also to Nicole, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, has there been any other previous contamination reports that have been done in the past where a more expedient time frame has been experienced rather than working on a 2 to 3 year time frame? Can any of the executive team answer that from sort of previous site inspections within the town?
Through your Deputy Mayor, no, obviously there has been decontamination works undertaken for the subject site, so 122 Hamilton Street, before my time or Ms Davies' time, but I have it on good authority that did take sort of 12 to 24 months to take that from a contaminated site to a decontaminated site to deal with satisfaction. So the time frames are real, and if we were to start this process, we would expect it to take 12 to 24 months.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Okay, so we've got an officer recommendation, we have an alternative motion, and the opportunity to move something different from those. Is there anybody that would like to move a motion?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Acting as a presiding member, I'd like to move the alternate motion that I've circulated to councillors. In terms of that, I believe I need a seconder before I delve into that, or can we read?
Would you like to read it out first so people know what they're dealing with?
And on account of the benefit of the microphone, would I be able to impose upon the CEO
For the
to read
recording, do you mean?
that? Just so it can be heard, because I don't have a microphone.
It won't help. The microphone's in the middle will pick
Well,
up
look,
your voice.
I'll talk
Yeah.
loudly then. So the alternate motion, the first part of that, and this is roughly adapted from the officer's recommendation, is say that council, and the first point, notes that the town will lodge applications for social housing economic recovery package grants from the Department of Communities in respect of each of the following, consistent with the approach in the report to this item. The properties identified there are 122 Hamilton Street, 14 Iverson Street and 87 Whitfield Street, collectively referred to as the properties. The second point there, in the event that the town is successful in obtaining a grant in respect of any of the properties, requests that this matter be returned to council for approval as to whether to proceed with the grant in respect of any or all of the properties. The third point, prior to returning this matter to council in accordance with resolution 2 above, council requests that the CEO prepares a confidential report on the range of options for disposal of any of the properties the subject of a successful grant, including considerations of valuations and the merits of the available options. And then the fourth point of the alternate would be, in any event, requests the CEO to prepare a confidential report in respect of the cost of preparing each property for the construction of residential dwellings. So that's what I'm proposing in the alternate to the officer's recommendation.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flicker. I note that the staff have provided a comment, but just for the benefit of those councillors who may not have yet had the opportunity to read that comment, would either Mr Gibson or Ms Maddis like to speak to that proposal?
Happy to, Deputy Mayor. Through you, the alternative motion is certainly understood. I suppose the staff comment would be that it does pose a potential reputational risk for the town if it pursues the grant opportunity currently on offer without a full commitment to actually avail itself of the grant if it is in fact approved. It's probably not a great look for the town nor council if we are successful in obtaining a grant only to decline it after we've been told that we've been successful. So that is a matter that council would need to consider as part of its decision making. In the document that was circulated to council earlier today, it broadly responded to the various options that exist for the Hamilton Street site. They're numbered 1 through 4. They are broadly, for the benefit of those that haven't read that, consolidate the site into one single parcel of 1,843 square metres. That's option 1. Option 2 is leave the 1,400 square metre site as is, but create the abutting 443 square metre sliver and dispose of those sites separately. Option number 3 would be consolidate the sites into the single 1,843 square metre site and then subdivide that site into 5 strata sites and sell those child properties individually. And option 4, which is a similar to option 3, simply involves building on the 5 resultant sites and thereafter selling the house and land packages. Now, there's a number of different derivatives of those particular options because you wouldn't have to maximise the dwelling yield or the lot yield. You could subdivide into 2 lots, 3 lots or 4 lots instead of 5 lots. So all of a sudden the number of options multiplies quite quickly. From a technical point of view, option number 1 was prior to this grant opportunity deemed to be the most appropriate and was in fact the preferred option of staff. Option 2 was not supported by staff on the basis that it would create a narrow lot and a lot that effectively monopolised the outlook onto the abutting open space. And option 3 and 4, whilst being probably financially advantageous and may well be the best options from a purely fiscal point of view, do carry elements of risk because they require upfront expenditure, requires probably some additional project management capability, and there would be time delays in delivering lots to market. So whilst there might be a greater return, those processes will be somewhat more complicated. So they are broadly the options. So if staff were required to bring back a report to council on Hamilton Street, those would likely be the options that council would see. In terms of how much information staff could reasonably provide to support decision making around those options, we could get obviously valuations from licensed land valuers, and that would be at council's expense, but they would simply be an opinion at a given moment. There's no guarantee that's what the lots would actually return as part of the commercial sale. So whether council considers it's appropriate to spend funds on a valuation, that's a matter for council. But we could undertake that work. However, there would still be an element of risk in council choosing one of those 4 options.
Thank you for that. Before I see if there's a seconder, are there any questions based on what Mr Gibson has just said? Okay, so is that a question, Councillor Carter?
Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, my understanding that this site was originally going to be swapped for the site in, which is we know it as Mrs Evans' land. What is the situation with that at the moment?
Through Deputy Mayor, that's correct. It was in years gone by intended that this site be swapped with a property on Highland Street, 27 Highland Street, if I recall. The lot was created at 1,400 square metres, specifically Highland Street required at the time to generate agreement for the swap. The swap effectively did not proceed on the basis that given the passage of time, the landowner simply changed their mind and said they didn't want the swap, and arguably they never actually wanted the swap. So instead of imposing that upon them, given that it wasn't what they actually wanted in the first place, staff sought council's agreement to simply purchase that property, which was done, I believe, last year. So the town, as a result, owns 27 Highland Street, because it paid for it, but it also owns Hamilton Street because it didn't relinquish it as part of the swap.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay, so Councillor McWilliam.
Just a question through you, Deputy Mayor. Are staff saying that this is the most appropriate lot to proceed with because it seems to be the least contaminated, or it is not contaminated at this juncture, and is the one that we can proceed with equanimity and confidence?
Through Deputy Mayor, yes, that's correct. It's staff's view that this is the most appropriate site for this particular grant opportunity for a number of reasons. Obviously, the one that has been raised previously is that it is not contaminated, or it's been decontaminated for restricted use. It presents, by not being contaminated, means there's one less issue to resolve. Obviously, there's some minor issues to resolve in terms of the retaining of the fill, but that isn't the same scale of an issue as the decontamination. The other reason is that it's the largest, that we can accommodate up to 7 single-bedroom dwellings on this. If you look at the other sites that are mentioned, that's been raised as part of these discussions, being Iverson Street, Whitfield Street, they are significantly smaller, and therefore can only accommodate 2 or 3 dwellings. So in terms of getting maximum benefit of the grant opportunity and providing the maximum social benefit for those that need this form of housing, Hamilton Street is considered the most advantageous.
Thank you for that. Okay, so if there's no further questions, we've had Councillor Prolifica move his Councillor Ames.
I'll just have a quick question, Deputy Mayor, and through to the executive team as well. What's the percentage likelihood of an approval for a grant if we were to submit it for 122 Hamilton Street, or is it sort of a hit and miss scenario based on other towns and councils going to the same watering hole as us?
Through Deputy Mayor, broadly the latter. The grant opportunity is not limited to local governments, it's also limited to social housing providers. That said, without being able to put a percentage on it, I would suggest we would be reasonably well placed if we pursued Hamilton Street, on the basis that the suburb of Bassendean is considered by the Department of Communities to have a very high demand, and there, you don't have to. It wouldn't come as a surprise to know there aren't that many 1,800 square metre sites in the suburb of Bassendean.
Okay, so if we've exhausted questions, as I just said, Councillor Prolifica has moved his alternative. For that to proceed to debate, we need a seconder. Is there anyone that would be willing to second Councillor Carter? Is there anybody who intends to debate against this motion? Would you like to, Councillor Wilding? All right, so we'll open debate. Councillor Prolifica, if you would like to speak to your motion.
Thank you. Look, the town of Bassendean is a relatively small local government. I mean, we're trying to do our bit to ease the social housing crisis. We're of limited means. I mean, we've only got so many blocks of land at our disposal. The Hamilton Street site is probably one of the prime sites that we have in the town. I mean, it's located near the Ashfield Flats. It has a splendid outlook. It would be a very attractive proposition for anybody that was looking to acquire land within the town and to experience that outlook. The problem we have, though, is that there are other sites within the town that have shortcomings or potentially shortcomings. So in relation to Iverson Street, which has been offered as an alternate site, I'm hearing that there is confirmation of that having issues. In relation to Whitfield Street, I'm hearing that that is something, an investigation needs to be undertaken in order to determine whether there's an issue for that site. So what I would be proposing through this motion, what could occur with that if that approach was successful, we certainly wouldn't be looking to withhold from the state what we were looking to do. We would say, look, we have limited options. These are the shortcomings with these properties. We're willing to help, but just bear with us, give us a bit of time so we can determine whether or not these properties can be offered up. The state wouldn't be bearing the cost of the remediation. That much has been made clear. So it would be for the town to determine whether the cost of remediating the sites, if that is necessary, is one which we would be happy to bear, and to dedicate that land for a period of time which may be significantly longer than what the other housing providers would be willing to offer, given that we are a local government. I mean, we can take a longer view of things and offer a longer time frame. So we might potentially be offering 20 or 30 years of social housing, and that would be on the back of saying we need several months in order to determine whether a site such as Whitfield Street would be appropriate or even available for this kind of housing. So we're certainly not opposed to social housing. It's just balancing the position of the town, in that we have, again, we are of limited means, so we need to get the most out of the assets that we have. And so that's what I'm focusing on in that regard. Other point, yes, is that in terms of, I suppose, how the town is perceived, I mean, there is the concern as to how the state will perceive us. I think there's also a concern as to how our residents would perceive us based on the existing arrangement and resolution of council, which form the basis of the land swap. So my understanding is the intention was to return the funds that we used to purchase that land back into the reserve from whence they came, and so we do need to be mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, would you like to speak as the seconder?
Thank you. Yes, now, on the outset, I'm very much in favour of social housing, and it's a great need. But my understanding that this is one of the most valuable blocks of land that we own in Bassendean, and one that was expected to return for the people of Bassendean. So, and I think that also the other two blocks have been sitting there unremediated for so long that this might be a good push to get something started in that respect. If the town is successful in obtaining a grant and then we decide to return it, well, that's nothing new, we've done that before. So I would support that we take this a bit more slowly and not make such a quick decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Wilding, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I broadly support the motion, which sounds a bit silly if I'm debating it, but the principle of the motion, that we haven't got enough information so far, and that we're making a decision and we're either having to commit to a decision now, which would then cause reputation damage if we were to revoke it, or commit to a decision that we couldn't revoke later on. That if Councillor Polifka was to present this motion at the next meeting, and if this motion was unsuccessful, I would be moving to defer this item to the next meeting, so that Council has more time to consider the issue, to consider the value of the land and what we'd be losing by moving through this proposal, to consider whether or not Hamilton Street is the most appropriate site. And I recognise Mr Gibson's comments that Bassendean as a suburb is desirable, though the actual location of the block may not be the most appropriate source of housing for most demographics that you could put in social housing or would be located in social housing. The proposal as it stands now, without financial modelling, without a clear direction of what the town will be getting itself into, I feel it would be irresponsible to rush into a decision at this particular meeting, and it's for that reason I am voting against Councillor Polifka's motion.
Can we just pause there for a moment? Councillor Wilding, you mentioned seeking a deferral. That's a procedural motion which supersedes others. Are you actually wanting to move a deferral and see if you have support, or?
So So this motion doesn't have to be resolved before
No.
the motion.
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah.
So is everybody on board with what's happening?
Yep.
Yeah. So at the moment we've got a live motion, which is the alternative. Councillor Wilding has expressed an interest in potentially moving a deferral motion. Before we proceed with that, I'm just curious though, the next meeting is in 2 weeks' time, and you indicated a desire for more information. Our CEO has indicated that there's not a lot more information that would be available between now and then. Would you like to add any further comments?
Certainly. I think the information will come in time. So if the grant was successful, there would probably be 3 distinct processes. One to engage a project manager, which would be funded through the grant. One would be a process, probably a tender for the construction of the dwellings, and we don't actually know what the cost of that would be, so we would be looking at value for money, and we would need to arrange with Department of Communities for some flexibility on what that would look like, but obviously testing the market for the best proposal. And then there would probably be a third process, an EOI for a community housing provider, and it's probably through that, through those 3 processes would we acquire the financials and the level of rigour that council are after. The alternative would be some predictive modelling with a high level of variance, you know, like sort of give or take 50%, and whether that would then give council enough confidence to feel that it could make a decision. But yeah, there's a lot of variability in that, and that is work that we would probably need to engage somebody to do in a very short period of time, and whether or not that would be feasible, I'm not sure. So I'm not confident that we could provide council with any further information over the next couple of weeks to satisfy the level of sort of clarity, granularity that you're seeking.
Can I just seek to clarify, you mentioned those 3 processes. If at any stage during those processes it became apparent that financially it was not a good option for the town, would the option still be available to us to say thank you but no thanks to the Department of Communities?
Well, as soon as you spawn those processes, you start expending costs, and they are costs that we would attribute to the grant. So unless the town is willing to absorb those costs and we hand the grant back, and as Mr Gibson mentioned, the reputational risks associated with that.
And also note, Councillor Wilding, you mentioned not just for further information but for further consideration by council. Yeah. Okay, so are you moving a deferral motion to the November 23rd meeting? Is there a seconder for the deferral? Councillor Polifka. Is there anybody against? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. And would you mind inviting Councillor Hamilton back in?
Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant.
Thank you, councillors. Move on to the circus, item 12.5. Revocation of Council Policy 4.6.
I'm happy to move it.
Okay, moved Councillor McLennan, seconder. Councillor Ames, anyone against?
Yeah, just had a question.
Certainly.
Exotic animals. What does that mean?
Lions and tigers.
I asked that question before.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that's a very good question. And the policy that staff are seeking to revoke does not actually define what an exotic animal is. But I think we could probably use common sense if we ever received an application and determine what an exotic animal is, and apply the delegation in accordance with the spirit of the delegation.
are no more questions, so we'll move on to the vote. Okay, so we had Councillor McLennan move and seconded was Councillor Ames, and all those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 12.7, draft amended local planning policy number 12, developments within the street setback area. We did cover this last week during the briefing, but do councillors have any other questions on this item? So do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Plivka and seconded Councillor McLennan. Anyone against? I declare that carried. 12.10 is the 2022 meeting dates of the Ordinary Council meeting, briefing sessions, committees and citizenship ceremonies. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in regards to council's engagement requirements for, I suppose, or some of the aspects of those meetings, if you want to maybe provide any comment, Peter, that'd be great. Mainly, I suppose, in regards to like citizenship ceremonies and so on and so forth.
Certainly, thank you. All councillors receive an invite to citizenship ceremonies, which are there's usually 3 a year. And some councillors choose to come to all of them, some to some, and
Some
so
to none?
you
can say it, it's okay.
It's really up to council.
Sure, okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? So do I have a mover for that item? Councillor Wilding, a seconder. Councillor McWilliam. All those in favour?
No, I'm sorry, I'm against that.
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to speak against that.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. I should have asked. So, Councillor Wilding, do you wish to open with any debate? No. Great. Councillor McWilliam? No. Councillor Carter?
Yes, it sounds like a silly thing to go against, but I've got nothing against the schedule that we're asked to vote on. What I do query, and I queried it at the briefing session, is why we have within the preamble mention of two concept workshops per month. Sorry?
I'm just questioning the relevance of this to the item
Yes,
that we're
I
making
was
a decision
Well,
on.
I'm just going to explain the relevance. We are required to go to these concept workshops. I don't know what that... bear with me.
Councillor Carter, can I just interrupt for a minute? In this motion before us, the officer's recommendation, the concept workshops are not included in the resolution. So what you're actually voting on is the meeting dates for the ordinary OCMs, the briefing sessions, the committees and citizenship ceremonies. You're not voting on the concept workshops at all.
No.
They're informal workshops. They're not, as these other meetings listed are the formal meetings of council. That's why we vote on them. The concept workshops are informal meetings.
Mm-hmm. Can I continue with my objection? Under meeting dates, because it does say under meeting dates, briefing sessions are designed to brief council. Council and staff also meet at concept workshops which are scheduled on alternate Tuesdays of each month. I did ask a question whether the attendance at these concept workshops are held either for or against a councillor's attendance record, and I was told they were as part of the attendance record. So my query is, why are they not actually in the schedule of all the others when they are a requirement that councillors attend? And that is the main objection that I have.
So could I ask the CEO to, because I think Councillor Carter is correct that concept workshops are in the attendance record.
So we do have provision on the website where it captures attendance at, for example, induction, training, concept workshops, briefing sessions, council meetings. So that's just about providing transparency and accountability. But in terms of not attending, for example, consecutive council meetings where a councillor's tenure position may be challenged, the concept workshops are not in that same category under the Act. So that they are quite different, as the Mayor indicated. They're informal, they're information briefing. They're really designed to prepare council for what's ahead and also engage on issues of strategy.
So Councillor McLennan.
Yeah, I just had a question. Firstly, could we have this as a conversation at another time amongst councillors? But secondly, my understanding is that council is only required to vote on those meetings which are public, and that's why this item has come before us now. So the workshops are a matter that we could potentially discuss at another time.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan.
I was just seeking to clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that the concept workshops are informal, and therefore it would be better to discuss those. And there is an upcoming workshop with a presentation next week, and I have encouraged all councillors to attend that workshop. But for the item that's before us tonight, it is voting on our formalised public meetings. And I would ask councillors to vote on the actual item in front of us, and we can discuss concept workshops at a concept workshop perhaps. So, okay. We have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Carter indicated she was against. Any other speakers to this item before I put it to the vote? No. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the item in front of us? That's carried unanimously. And so item 12.12 that councillor does the calendar. Oh, that's carried. Okay, in envelope. Sorry, apologies, guys. There are no motions of which previous notice has been given. Item 14, announcements of notice of motion for the next meeting. Are there any motions from councillors for the next meeting? There are none. Item 15, urgent business. There is none. Item 16, confidential business. There is none. And at 2 minutes to 7, I